Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to ranting and raving about board games, but usually more the ranting part. We have got the newest entry from Stonemaier Games, and this one just sort of came out of the blue, because normally Stonemaier is like very open about, alright, we're doing this game, and here's the development line and everything, but for some reason, this one just appeared. It just appeared out of nowhere. This is Origin Story, and this is essentially meant to be a 45-minute trick-taking game. So it's like, okay, granted, I may not have the best history with Stonemaier games in recent years, but certainly trick takers, I'm keen to see what they can do with this, because I like trick taking as a mechanic. You know, I've got a few, I've got several that work for 2 players and multiplayer. I like the co-op ones, I like the competitive ones. Trick taking is a genre that I kind of like, and lately we seem to be noticing a bit of a trend in the industry of a lot of trick taking games coming out. I think trick taking is now kind of, it's not as bad as, say, like the roll and write genre when that became popular, but certainly a lot more people are starting to make trick-taking a part of their game, and you know what, I'm cool, but the problem with that is that you can only do so much with the trick-taking mechanic to make it unique, interesting, and to make it, like, you know, stand out from the pile. So, curious thing with this one is it's had a few mixed reviews online. You know, some people absolutely rave about it, and some people hate its guts, and it's like, okay, so what's it about that's so divisive, other than the artwork, which honestly, the artwork's fine. I mean, it's nice artwork. You know, this artist has done a lot of nice stuff in the past, but, you know, and certainly I do find it weird that the back of the box has got a piece of paper on it to basically count as the back of the box, because for whatever reason they didn't print it on the actual back of the box.
Really spectacular, spared no expense.
Slightly odd, I admit. But yeah, I'm curious to see what it is about this game that's getting people talking about it in both ways.
Get on with it.
So pretty straightforward. Origin Story has you take control of a superhero board with a basic hero and basic special ability that's unique with all 5 of them. You have this massive deck full of various bonuses that you can give your superhero, and this takes place over the course of 5 rounds. Each round, players will draw 3 of these, pick 1 to upgrade on their board, and then these powers will build up as the game goes on. Some need to be charged with stamina, which is kind of like your little currency, but others are just like ongoing abilities or things that apply to the first trick, the last trick, the scoring, whatever. There's all sorts of different stuff in this deck. Over the course of the game, you will have built up 4 of these special powers, so there's different ones that will be triggering each round, but at the start of the game, you will have been given a couple of these like big superhero cards to consider, and then you will have picked one, and it will use it as a round reference card, but in round 5, you will place it on your board as like, this is my identity, this is who I am, and it's another power that you'll get for round 5. Also, during the game, in round 3, you'll draw an event card. It has some special things that apply to round 3 only, so it's just basically part of the narrative. And the trick-taking part is, as you would expect from every other trick-taking game. There are essentially 3 main suits, as well as 1 trump suit, and you play in standard trick-takey fashion. So somebody plays a card, everybody else has to lead, the trump suit will beat out all, except with all these powers going around, it's going to depend on what you have as to whether you want to win or lose tricks or not. On top of that, you've also got an alignment dial which can be set to hero or villain mode, and the idea is that if you want to be a hero at the start of the round, then you need to win more tricks because you'll get more points. But if you think you're going to shoot the moon and go for the whole I win no tricks aspect, then you can flip it to the villain side and you don't want to win tricks, in which case you'll get a flat amount of points. The game will scale from 1 to 5 players. There is a solo mode included and a 2-player variant as well. Primarily it is meant to be played with 3 to 5 players, and that's pretty much all there is to say.
That's easy!
A fairly straightforward affair, fairly straightforward rules, at least when it comes to the rules for the main game. You know, the rulebook itself is not particularly big, and there's not a huge amount of rules to explain, and if you've played any trick-taker game in the past, you'll know exactly how this works. So the main flow of the game is nice and straightforward, with a nice easy rulebook. The main complication comes from all these powers. Now, each individual power is not necessarily, you know, confusing in itself, although a few of them may require a little bit of a second read through. But the problem is that the rulebook does not cater for all the potential interactions that this deck of cards can have. You know, you might have 3 powers here, somebody else has 3 powers over there, somebody else has 3 powers over there, and when they interact with each other or mess around with the timing of phases and stuff, it can get very confusing. And if you don't take my word for it, go on Board Game Geek and look at how many forum threads there are for this game in terms of asking FAQ questions. A lot rise up here. In fact, this is probably the trick-taking game I've played where I've had the most questions asked during the game. You know, most trick takers may like, how's that work, or that little card, or that little ability, and, you know, one or two abilities are, you know, questioned. This one, though, you get plenty of FAQ moments pretty much every single game, and sometimes you just have to make a decision and run with it because the rules do not make it clear how they should interact, and unless you want to spend all your time traipsing through BGG forums to find the answer, you're just going to have to make a decision and roll with it. Now, the trick-taking part is nothing particularly special. I mean, it's only 3 suits and a trump suit, and that's basically it. And you only get dealt 8 cards at the beginning of the round, which is kind of a bit on the low side, really, because it doesn't mitigate enough, like, getting a hand of just 1 suit. Most trick-taking games will have you draw about 11, 12, maybe more cards than that, and I think that's a better number, because it allows for, like, times when you might draw a lot of a suit, but you'll still have usually some of the other suits as well. With 8 cards, though, you could end up in a situation where you just legit don't have an entire suit in your hand, and if you have got something like, you know, 5 or 6 cards of the same suit in your hand, you've only got 8 to begin with, then it makes that just a little bit more impactful. The special abilities that you grab are kind of like the focus of the game, you know, building up a very unique player board to everybody else, and they definitely will make you pretty unique. The starting ability is a bit lame for players, you know, most of the time you won't even use it, and that, along with some of these other powers, does have its own problem. We'll get into that in a second, but there's all sorts of weird and wacky powers here. I mean, beast mode, you know, gain a stamina if you win at least 2 more tricks than the hero who won the most tricks. You know, the belt, add 2 to the value of your science card suit. If you win the first trick, gain 2 VP. If not, draw a card, discard a card. Or this one, gain 2 VP if you won 0 tricks. You know, there's all sorts of different little powers, and that's just 4 out of a whole deck. I mean, you do have quite a lot. You know, the variety in this game is pretty high. Gotta give it props. Little things are a little bit odd. I mean, why they bothered with an event deck just to have a random event in round 3? It just seems kind of odd. I mean, if you're going to do events, why not have them in every round? Or just don't bother with the mechanic. It just feels like that was like a throwaway one in there. But the abilities that come forth, you know, including your end of round ability, all cool. It does, you know, make you quite unique. The problems that they do create, though, are twofold. Firstly, there's a lot to keep track of by the time you get to round 4 and 5, because when people have got, you know, 3 or 4 abilities each, particularly in the later rounds, and if you've got a lot of players, you find that this is like, oh Christ, I know, what can you do again? What can you trigger? So hang on, so at the start of the round, you can trigger this, but at some point you want to win 0 tricks, but not this round because you're not charging your ability. Are you actually charging it? No, you're not charging it. Okay, fine, we'll do that. Okay, what am I doing with this one? Right, so that's fine. And you've got an ability which mucks up one of mine. It's like, there's quite a little bit you got to keep track of between players, particularly in the later rounds, which is why this game feels kind of more at its home when you play it with less players. You know, a 4 max. I think 5 is a bit too much at that regard. The 2-player variant's not bad, actually. The 2-player variant has you basically playing each with a sidekick who has a bunch of cards face down next to you, as well as a couple face up, and you have a choice of, like, you know, playing one of their sidekick cards, and they might be able to win the trick for you if you didn't want to win it yourself, or if you're about to lose one, and you don't score points for them, but you'll always have 2 visible cards out of the ones they've got, and each player has one. It kind of makes for maybe like a tiny bit of extra strategy that you can get from a 2-player trick taker. Although, that being said, it's still a variant on a game, and it's still not the best way to play this. And let's face it, we already have Fox in the Forest. Fox in the Forest is the definitive 2-player trick-taking game. There is none better. So, you know, rather than having these trick takers try to have a 2-player variant with dummy hands, which dummy hands are not popular with people, you might as well just stick with something like Fox in the Forest. But the main issue I have with these powers, though, is the main problem that befits every single Stonemaier game in existence, because I'm pretty sure at the Stonemaier game's office, there is some defense mechanism that basically kills you stone dead if you, much like Alice in Borderlands' defense mechanism, if you utter the word balance. Because it feels like with the design of this game that somebody just basically went, right, let's just copy how trick-taking works in every other game ever, right? We don't need to design that. And now let's just come up with as many different ideas for powers as we can brainstorm in one big session with a couple of drinks. That's what the design of this game feels like, because these powers range from, you know, pretty much mostly useless, to situationally good depending on the player count, to outright broken. There are definitely aspects here where, when you create this many powers, you're going to end up with balance issues. But, Stoneware's track record does not have balance as their main forte. I mean, hell, even the ones on my shelf like Wingspan and Viticulture, I would not stand up in front of you and say, these are balanced games. No, even they've got balance issues, and same with Scythe. But, recently we've had games like Tapestry and a few others which are just outright broken. Even Expeditions, broken player powers and stuff. They just don't seem to know how to make player balance a thing. And here, it's even more compounded, because some of these cards, you draw 3 of them and you get to keep 1. So there's a little mitigation. It's not all bad. It's not complete randomness. But some of these cards just don't work in a 2-player game or a 3-player game, but they are fantastic in 5, and vice versa. A card that's fantastic in 2 and 3 players absolutely sucks for 5. And this is even the case with some of the basic abilities that you have, stuff that requires you to win certain things. I mean, if you won 2 or fewer tricks, gain 1 VP per stamina on this character. That in itself is infinitely better to do in a high player count than it is a low player count. But nothing in this game scales with the player count. It just gives you a bunch of powers and just says, play it with as many players as you like and see what happens. That's not good design to just basically say, well, some of these cards are going to be frequently unbalanced. Roll with it. And you might be building up a particular synergy, but it is still luck of the draw as to which powers you get. Somebody may just end up drawing the most broken combination possible with these powers, at which point they're going to steamroll the game. By the end of round 3, you'll have some powers on your board, you'll have had the event in that, and you will realize there is just no way I'm going to win this game, because they've got such a broken combo already. My powers don't synergize at all. I just never drew anything that kind of worked. And there's no way that I'm going to be able to recover from this points-wise. And that's not a good feeling when you feel like you've basically been pseudo-knocked out of the game in an early stage because somebody just got lucky with their powers. And, luck is a big aspect of this. Now, I get that's probably what it was trying to go for. It was just meant to be a chaotic trick-taker. But I like my trick-takers to be more serious nature. I mean, yeah, you can have trick takers with wacky special powers and weird bidding phases. I mean, I've got Niet. The Dwarf King is fine, but it's not one of my favorite trick takers. But I mean, I play stuff like the Crew, Fox in the Forest, what was it called? The King Boru one that I think it was Osprey Games brought that one, which had trick taking as a little mechanic. You've got the Lord of the Rings trick taker that's come out at the moment. I've got a Badger downstairs. That was another, I think it's called Badger or the Badger trick taking game or something. It came out a couple of lessons ago. And I've got Nikosu Dice, fantastic trick taker game. I'm trying to think of other ones that I've got. I've got Diamonds, another great one. I think I already mentioned the Crew. So there's a lot of these great trick takers that can have some cool, funky abilities, but they're still generally a serious trick taker. Banner Festival, another good trick taker. Yeah, those sort of coming to mind, the ones that are on my shelf. But this one just feels like a bit of a chaotic mess. It's just, here you go, basic trick taking, but we've thrown in a deck full of special powers. That alone does not jump out as something that reviewers out there should be giving 9 out of 10s and 10 out of 10s for. Dizar and a bunch of other creators, I mean, they are going ape for this. Like saying this is like one of the best things they played, one of the best trick takers they played. Sorry, it just freaking isn't, alright? There are trick takers like the Crew and the Kosu Dice and stuff like that I would be giving 9s and 10s to. Those are fantastic trick takers. For a 2-player, Fox in the Forest can't be beaten as a 2-player trick-taking game. Solo mode, you basically have your hand, and you have 2 hands for the AI opponents, and it's not it's okay, but trick takers for the most part don't work solo, and in this case you've got 2 hands, so you've got some idea of what the opponent has, but the way that it gets cards, and you have to learn this like little flow chart basically of, right, so hang on, so if it's got the If it's got the trump suit in there, or it's got the highest card, it will play this card. But if it's got this aspect, then it'll play this card. And if it's got this aspect, it'll play this card. It's like, you got to remember that all the time, which is pretty difficult to do. But also, it's a very swingy solo mode. You know, the powers and the abilities that the opponent has, and also just the timing of when it will play certain cards, and the fact that it gets more cards as you go through, just make it very random and swingy. So again, the solo mode just feels like a bit of a chaotic luck fest. I mean, go watch a couple of playthroughs that there are on the internet. You know, some creators have done solo playthroughs, and as you watch them, it just doesn't feel like there's a huge amount of control in there. You know, trick-taking is not a genre that really works for solo, with the exception of 4 Northwood. 4 Northwood is in my collection now, and I gotta admit, that's a bloody good solo trick taker. So, you know, there are exceptions to this rule, but this is not how to really do a solo trick taker, in my opinion. It doesn't even feel that much like a trick taker at that point. All in all, this one just kind of feels flat, you know. It just feels like a chaotic mess. You know, I'm playing a very basic trick taker game with a bunch of special powers, and I may just happen to have a bunch of powers that work fantastically, and a bunch of powers that don't work at all. And that's basically the game. You know, there's not really a huge amount of strategy in the game between rounds. I mean, yeah, you might influence your choices in that, but even the whole alignment dial thing, you know, you're playing a 2-player game, being the villain is pretty straightforward. You know, it gives you a flat 4 VP, but then heroes give you 1 VP per trick 1. In low player counts, you might as well just be the hero all the time. But in high player counts, it's a lot easier to hide behind the villain mask. And, you know, go for that aspect. So it's, you know, player count has an effect on this as well. It's just, come on. They needed to reel in a little bit of that chaos, you know. The chaos factor is too high here. The player scaling is non-existent. It just doesn't, you know, it just leads to games where somebody can be knocked out early, feel useless, or it can lead to games where somebody is so powerful that you might as well just call the game there and then, because there's no way you can beat them. It's just not what I want to see from a trick taker game. This one for me gets a 4 out of 10. It's a below average game for me. It's, you know, I like the fact that it's a simple game to play. It's not, you know, a difficult game. It's got very few rules until you get into the solo mode, and then it gets a little bit more fiddly. But it's very basic trick taking, and the powers themselves aren't tricky, but the interaction with them is going to lead to a lot of FAQ moments, and if you don't like traipsing through rules forums, or if you don't like having FAQ moments, this is going to put you off like that. But, you know, having player scaling issues with one of your main mechanics of the game, and having a bunch of powers, of which like a third of the deck could become useless, depending on what player count you're at, I mean, that doesn't sit well with me. You know, that's not how it should be done. There are better trick takers out there, and perhaps for me, I'm more of a serious trick taker player rather than a chaotic trick taker player. You know, that maybe that's affecting me somewhat, because definitely I think as I look at a lot of the trick takers on my shelf, they are generally more serious trick taker games with maybe some funky abilities, but not chaotic stuff like this. You know, this is for a different audience, perhaps, I don't know.
He's already dead.
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Don't forget to check out the rest of my SN content. There is plenty of games reviewed and plenty more to come besides. I've even done some trick takers in the past. I mean, look at my Nokosu Dice review that I did. That is a fantastic trick-taking game, and one that does need to be brought into a more common market. But, you know, that is the kind of trick taker that's like, oh yeah, mwah, creme de la creme. Not something like this. But, you know, it'd be interesting to know your opinions. Do you love this game? Do you hate it? And is it purely just because you know, is it down to this? Is this the reason you think it's amazing? If so, I totally get that. It just isn't for me. So take care, and remember, regardless of whether your origin story is going to be just you constantly brooding on the rooftop or not, it's still only a game. So bye for now.